What do you think you would say if someone asked you whether it's harder to be a teenager these days than it was in the past? Do you think it's harder? Or might today's teens have it easier than past generations? The Pew Research Center has been studying this and found that whatever your answer is, you'll probably cite technology as the reason. I'm Jennifer Strong, and this is Shift.
Now here on the steering column is a device called Auto Cruise. You simply set the speed you want.
Self-driving robo-taxis are already on the road in 2 U.S. cities.
As the disc rotates, a mirror reflects the light in the way that depends on how the signal was recorded.
This is the 100 terabyte I present to you Electro, the Moto Man. Ladies and gentlemen.
I would say that one of my greatest skills is my ability to interact with humans.
This episode, we dig into the study with one of the lead researchers.
Hi, I am Gottfried. I am the Associate Director of Internet and Technology Research at Pew Research Center. We at Pew Research Center, we are a nonpartisan, non-advocacy research organization. And so the goal of our work is to inform the public and to inform public debate about the issues and events and views of America and around the world. And so we do a lot of data-driven research to provide this data to these conversations and to provide interesting and important findings to inform a range of different conversations.
So you have a new report that looks at this question of whether it's actually harder to be a teen now than it was in the past. And before we dig into that, do you mind if I ask you what made you ask this question?
Absolutely. So overall, Pew Research Center has had a long history of studying tech adoption among Americans, both among adults, but also among teens themselves. And adolescents often are the trailblazer when it comes to technology. They are often the first to adopt something, to interact with new devices or online platforms. And they're an important group to explore when it comes to the social impact of technology because they're often at the center of cultural debates about the impact of such things as the internet and smartphones as social media on their mental health, on their physical well-being, on their socialization, and a range of other aspects of their lives. So this study itself is part of a series of work that we have done on the impact of technology on teens. And our previous work this year has included such topics as teens' relationships with screens or their use of various digital devices. And so this is really building off of these other studies that we have done. So for this project specifically, what we did is that we recruited a sample of parents, a little over 1,400 parents, a representative sample, and asked them a series of questions, and then followed up those questions specifically to their teenager. And so for this study, it's specifically 1,400 pairs of parents and teens. So be able to talk about teens and parents representatively in the United States. The goal of this study here is to bring teens' own voices into understanding the impact in their own lives. And this specific work also brought in the voices of parents as well, aiming to understand how they think teens are faring these days as compared to teens 20 years ago. And there's been a lot of debate around how teens are faring these days. Do they think it's harder to be a teen these days? Do they think it's easier to be a teen these days? And so that's exactly what we asked of teens and parents. Compared to 20 years ago, do you think it's harder or easier being a teen these days? So we thought that was really important to try to unpack why that's the case. And that's really important. And so overall, we saw that many people, both teens and parents, did say that it is harder being a teen these days than it is compared to 20 years ago. Now, parents were more likely to say this. About 7 in 10 parents did say this compared to a little under half of teens. But we did see that overall that was the most common answer that was provided by both parents and teens.
Did they say it for the same reasons, though? I mean, probably most of us would not be surprised if there's some daylight between teens and their parents. So it is interesting that they all seem to have more or less agreed that it is harder. They think it's harder right now. But what were some of the reasons they gave?
Absolutely. So what we did from there is we did follow up with both parents and teens. If they said harder, if they said easier, we wanted to know why, but we wanted to know why in their own words. And so we allowed them to just write down exactly what was at the top of their mind about the reasons why it is harder, the reasons why it would be easier these days. And so what we did from there, as our research team went through there and looked through those answers, we had a team of coders and actually look at the various themes that were rising up within there. And so we saw some very striking and common themes that were coming up both among parents and among teens. Focusing first on those who said harder, for parents, overwhelmingly we saw that technology was a reason why they said that it is harder being a teen these days, with social media being one of the most common answers why. So for example, I'm going to provide a quote here to provide a little bit of nuance to say, just to show what one of the parents said. So for example, we see that one parent, a father in their 40s, said that social media is a scourge for society, especially for teens. They can't escape social pressures and are constantly bombarded by images and content that makes them feel insecure and less than perfect, which creates undue stress that they can't escape. And a mother in her 40s also said kids are being told what to think and how to feel based on social media. And so we see that there is this richness of technology that is coming through in why parents feel that it is harder being a teen these days. Now, when we looked at something similar for teens themselves, why they said that it was harder these days, we do see that technology does come up a bit still. And it is about 4 in 10 of those who said it was harder did say it was because of technology. And so, for example, one teen girl did tell us social media tells kids what to do and say. And if you aren't up on it, you look like the fool and become like the outcast from lots of people. And so we see that still there is a lot of technology that is coming up when you look at teens. But the difference that we see here is the rates at which technology is being mentioned by parents who say it's harder and by teens who say it's harder. And so we see that parents are much more likely to be blaming technology than teens are. And so that is where we see the big difference here, is that it may be common, but it is much more common that we see among parents.
As you mentioned, you've done quite a bit of study in the past on screen time and social media use. If you zoom out and bring all these things together, big picture, what are you looking at?
That is a great question. And so one of the things that we are looking at, first broadly, we want to be able to bring teens and parents' voices into the debates that we see. A lot of times we hear a lot of conversation about the impact of social media and technology on teens and adolescents in America's youth. But a lot of times we don't get to hear teens' voices themselves in that work. And so that is the broader goal of what we're trying to accomplish here in this work, is to bring teens' voices and to bring parents' voices into these conversations. And so that is the broader goal of this work here. Now, specifically when it does come to screen time, that is something that absolutely we have seen a lot of conversation around. And so in this series of work, we looked at whether teens view screen time as excessive, whether they take certain things as steps to limit what they do, what they feel like when they don't have their phones. And we also want to know, when it came to screen time, what they're grappling with when it comes to regulating their child's use of digital devices. And so when we looked at the screen time work, is that we did ask a series of parallel questions about their experiences and how the experience may differ or be similar between parents and teens. And so there are a number of places in which we do see that they see eye to eye on what the experience actually is. For instance, when we look at the screen time data, we see that identical shares of teens and parents say that they often argue about phone use. And we know that about half of parents of teens are saying that they look through their teens' phones. And many teens know that this is actually happening. And so we see that a lot of places, they're experiencing similar things. But there are struggles that underlie that. As I mentioned, there are arguments that happen between parents and teens, that many parents do see this as a priority about managing their digital use. But many find it difficult to be able to manage that at the same time. And so there's a lot of nuance that underlies that. What are the difficulties between parents and teens and what that relationship actually is?
Did anything surprise you about the series of reports and this work that you've been doing?
So one of the things in this specific piece that surprised me was that throughout our work, we've noted that teens are not a monolith. There are a lot of instances dependent on different characteristics, whether it is gender, whether it's race and ethnicity, whether it's household income, in which we see the experiences differing. Something that is surprising in the work that we see here is that there were a lot of similarities within the teen population and within the parent population when you look at the reasons why it is harder or it's easier to be a teen these days. We saw a little bit of variation when it comes to gender when looking at social media, but overall, we saw a lot of similarities across many of the characteristics of teens and the reasons why it may be harder or the reasons why it may be easier being a teen these days, which is something that really stood out to us. And so that was quite interesting in what we saw there.
Would it be fair to say, as I'm thinking about this around social media and what might make it harder or easier, what I heard from you saying was that the parents are blaming the tech and maybe the teens are blaming other teens using the tech?
I think that it isn't necessarily that there is a specific blame on any individual actors when it comes to looking at the various themes. I think that when we looked at the data itself, there was a lot of different themes that came up when we looked at social media or we looked at technology more broadly. And so there were a lot of people who just said social media or just said technology or just said phones or something like that. But then there were a lot of other parents and a lot of other teens that did start to bring in other types of issues as related to social media, related to technology. And so whether this is negative interactions that people do have online and that people may see cyberbullying, or whether it's the pressures or expectations that people may have to look or act or feel a certain way on these platforms. So it isn't necessarily that they are blaming a certain actor, but it's the range of different issues that are brought up within the context of technology and social media that we often did see.
So what are you going to be looking for going forward?
So this is absolutely an area of research that we want to continue to keep our eye on. We want to be able to understand and see how the relationship between teens and technology does continue to grow, how that continues to evolve and what that looks like, especially as there are newer and continuing evolving technologies that are happening. So that's something without a doubt. And then, so we're going to continue to look at, where are teens these days? What are the platforms? What are the venues that they are continuing to use and be at? And then other areas that we are continuing to focus on is understanding such things as what impact do these technologies, does social media, do devices have on their lives? This includes looking at, such things as their mental health. This includes such things as various types of technologies and how that may impact, how such things as school or other types of aspects of their lives. So we're continuing to look at this as a theme of research within our broader technology portfolio.
Looking across this work you've done with teens, are there any trends or things that you will be following as you go forward?
We did also ask those who said that it is easier being a teen these days, the reasons why as well. And the thing that stands out there is both parents and teens who say it is easier being a teen these days also point to technology. And that is something that really is interesting, is that yes, there's a large sense of technology for why it may be harder among those who say it's harder. But it also is a way that teens and parents do say that it is making the teens' lives easier as well. And that was pretty striking. And I think one of the things that is going to be something that we continue to look at going forward is that thinking about the impact of technology on teens, that it is a highly nuanced type of relationship that teens do have with technology. And it's not that it is all negative, and it's not that it is all positive, but teens do see a range of different ways in which it can impact their lives in both positive and in negative ways. And so, for example, when we look at a study that we did a couple of years back, looking at social media specifically, there's a whole range of ways in which teens do see that they may struggle with social media. So, for example, with the drama, with feeling left out, or making it feel worse than their own lives. And we see that there are differences within the population, with girls, in this instance, teen girls, more likely to experience some of those things. But at the same time, there's a lot of places in which teens do see value in social media, and teens do see value in technology. So specific to this study that we did a couple years back, that social media, many do say that it makes them feel more connected. It may increase the likelihood they have a support system, or it may increase the likelihood that they can express their creativity. And so we do see that there's this highly nuanced way that teens do see technology, social media, and other digital devices having a positive and a negative impact on various aspects of their lives. And it is something that we're going to continue to track as we continue to go forward.
This has been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
This episode was produced by me and Emma Silikans and mixed by Garrett Lang, with original music from him and Jacob Gorski. Thanks for listening. I'm Jennifer Strong.